So we'll go ahead and get started with the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, June the 19th. We have several items on our agenda tonight. The first item being the delivery of the Charter Review Commission's recommendation to the council. But before we get started with that tonight, there are a couple of things that I'd like for Mr. Feuerborn to discuss. Earlier this evening, we talked about the process of moving through this over the next several work sessions, and I wanted to make sure that we kind of understood that path as we move forward. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Feuerborn first.
Thank you, Your Honor. We thought it would be a good idea to review with the City Council the next steps, and with the Commission as well, that would take place. I have placed this item onto the City Council's work session agenda for the next 3 City Council work sessions, which would be July 3rd, July 17th, and July 31st. It will be on for each of those for their discussion should they need it. And with that, and the Charter Commission is very used to me doing this, I'm going to defer to Mr. Zur to kind of talk about some of the meat and potatoes of what can occur during those discussions and what can't, if you would. Mr. Zur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feuerborn. Mayor, I'm happy to provide additional input this evening, and it's been a pleasure to be able to work with both the council as well as the commission, the Charter Review Commission, on this matter. The language of the Charter Review Commission and the charter regarding their review indicates that the Charter Review Commission is to make their presentation to the council, and the council is to then, by ordinance, have the matter placed on the next following ballot. This gives, the work sessions will give an opportunity for council members to kind of chew on the report that's being presented. If there are items that the council would like to remand back to the commission for evaluation or further discussion, or an issue that's been that the council has that should be considered, they're welcome to do so. That would basically been remanding it back to the commission for further evaluation of those particular items, and they can then be incorporated or updated into any particular report prior to final approval and presentation. So the idea is these work sessions will give an opportunity for presentation to the council from the commission, opportunity for the commission to, or the council to kind of chew on it and provide any input or feedback back to the commission. But I really don't want the council to step on the toes and the purview of the commission at the end of the day with regard to their final report. Once the final report is then submitted back for final approval, it'd be by ordinance then approved by the council and placed on the following ballot. So I want to make sure we kind of keep the ground rules a little bit open on that one. This is supposed to be from the commission members and the community and their report to us, but I really don't want to have the council interjecting all of their input and making it their report at the end of the day. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Zur. And I'd like now to go ahead and introduce the chairperson for the Charter Review Commission, Mr. Derek Moorhead.
Thank you very much, members of the council. As you can see, 8 of the members of the Charter Review were able to attend here tonight. We're happy to be here. We're happy to provide you with a report. Since I actually sit also with the council, graciously a contributor of ours, Vice Chair Stephanie Daring, will be the one presenting to the council. So I'll go ahead and at this time turn it over to Ms. Daring.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members, charter members, and citizens. As you heard, my name is Stephanie Daring, and I was the co-chair of this year's Charter Review Council. I'm here to present the updated charter to you, and I'd like to acknowledge the members of the commission. And if you all would do this for me, Derek Moorhead, raise your hand if you would please. He was our chair. Sheldon Castleman, Tim Stidham, Joe Burke is not here. There you are, he came in late. Mike Wilson, Matt Wiggins, Miss Charlene Hubach is not going to be here tonight, and Calvin Acklin. We began our review in early fall of 2016. We met twice a month to review it. Our members reviewed all 9 articles of the charter, and as you may or may not know, this was not my first, second, but third review of the charter. I am the only one on the commission that was the original author in 1997. Mr. Castleman was a returning reviewer from 10 years ago. So we're not all rookies on this council. I have to say that this was the most thorough job that has been done on the 3 times that I have reviewed it. Our chair, Mr. Moorhead, who is an attorney, gave us much legal advice in various issues. Also, there were some points of issue which we really had to hash over. For instance, term limits on boards and council members, whether the council should be expanded because of our growing city, or if concealed weapons should be approved in the city hall. All of these are issues that reflect things that needed to be reviewed because since the last charter, because of the way our lives are changing. We would like to thank the city staff who did a lot of behind the scene research between meetings. A special thank you to Jim Feuerborn, our city manager, city attorney Jonathan Zur, and a very special thank you to Jeannie Werner, who did all of the administrative work for our commission and provided us with snacks and water. Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we do have in our packets the actual review commission recommendations, and I assume at this point there might be some questions from council members if you've had an opportunity to review the submission of the changes and maybe need some clarification on those recommendations, or if you've even had a chance to think about it, maybe something you'd like to kick back to the commission for further consideration. Although it is fairly early in the process, and we've got several meetings that we're going to discuss this tonight, we have the packet now. It may be an opportunity that we bring the commissioners back with us at the next work session after we've had a chance to review and reflect upon those recommendations that have been made by the review commission. And because there is a lot there, there's a lot to it. I know there was a lot of work that was done. Trust me, I sat in on a few of those, and they did an extremely thorough job. I didn't make all of them. I apologize for that. But I do know that in the 10 months that this group worked, I couldn't have asked for anything more out of a group of citizens for their concentrated efforts that they made on each and every item within the charter, which, as you know, really is the lifeblood of a charter form of government. And that's what we are, and very proud of it. And so I wanted to offer that up tonight to see if any of the council members had anything they'd like to add tonight or ask of the commissioners as they're here now. Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank the Charter Commission Review Committee for all their hard work and time. It's an extreme undertaking, and I appreciate everything you've done. Good, well done work. Congratulations, and thank you for bringing this to us. What I want to address or express, I guess express, is that I was kind of assuming, and I don't like to assume, but my expectation is that we, the council, would get a report from the Charter Commission on the entirety, I can't speak, the entirety, thank you. So before we start dissecting it, that way we and the citizens via the television and the folks here are able to hear it at the same time that we are also before we start dissecting it. Because if something comes up in Section A that is relevant to Section J, we won't know that until we have that information. So that's just my thoughts, and I think that's, it's, you know, personally, I think that's respectful to the work that the Charter Review Commission has done, that they have the opportunity to give this to us and us take it back and then come back with suggestions or comments or questions.
Sure, I think that's a fair expectation. Stephanie, did you have anything to add to that?
If you look on page 21, where there are the recommended ballot changes, and that's a good starting point for you to begin looking at what the changes that we have recommended. There are a total of 15 changes that we have recommended to go toward the ballot, and that will give you an idea. Those are pretty much the ideas of where we worked on and proposed for the public to make changes. And we worked on those. Those changes bring us into the next decade. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about.
With that said, I think because Mr. Zur was the scrivener for all of this and sat through all those meetings and had to kind of put in ballot language in place. That's what the preceding 20 pages is of the process, that he was able to boil it down at the recommendation of the Review Commission. And so is there, would you prefer that Mr. Zur maybe present those from the legal aspect and the one person that had to work hand in hand with the commission to put all of this in place?
I have no problem with that. I have total confidence and trust that Mr. Zur has given complete consideration as far as the legal aspects of this, and I trust his opinion and his guidance in this. I have no problem with that. I don't want the commissioners to think that they are not important or that they are discounted by that. That's not my intent. But if Mr. Zur is more than willing and the key point, the point person to speak on that, I have no problem with that at all.
Mr. Moorhead, did you have a comment?
Just more of a question. Since the report was actually submitted to all the council last Thursday, the council did receive the report. There's 9 primary sections of recommendations. Was it the desire to go through each of the articles or just the recommended changes themselves? I'm not sure the full scope of what you're requesting.
I guess what I'm requesting or expecting is kind of a brief summary or a Cliff's Notes of what's going on here. Because, yes, we did get these Thursday, but the citizenry did not.
Okay,
And
are you wanting us to read them all for the public? Is that what you're wanting us to do? What's going on?
I wouldn't be opposed to that. I don't want to belabor this meeting, but I want the citizens to be able to have the same opportunity or a like opportunity that we, the council, have gotten, instead of, just them sitting back saying, well, they've gotten this information. I don't know anything about it. I think it would help with transparency that we give or we receive the same thing, that as much as the citizens can at the same time. That's what I'm advocating.
Okay. Well, I do know that during either the last or the next to last meeting, that Mr. Zur did a great synopsis of those proposed amendments. Mr. Zur, would you feel comfortable in making that similar presentation
I'll do my
here
best.
tonight? Okay.
I'm happy to
Yeah,
try.
if you're good with that, I think that would help the council, and as Mr. Kellogg says, the viewing audience as they hear what the commission's work has produced.
Okay. I'm happy to provide that, and obviously stop me throughout the course of it, council members and members of the commission, if you think I've gone astray or if you are looking for additional information on it. What you'll find is, and I would commend Commission Member Daring with regard to this, if you pull out page 21 and 22 and 23, you're going to find the recommended ballot language, and I'll try and follow along with the recommended ballot language on my presentation to you this evening, and I'm going to tie it back to the summary of recommended amendments that are included within the remainder of the packet, or the prior portions of the packet. At the conclusion of the Commission's evaluation, they had approximately 26 changes that I have distilled down into the questions 1 through 15 as far as the ballot language is concerned, and you'll see each one of those questions outlined. If the members of the public are interested, I know that we're making the report available. It is a public document at this particular point. The summary of recommended amendments, and I'll just start the first one. Question 1 is, shall the charter of the city of Raymore be amended to clarify terminology regarding the voting requirements for a vote of the council In this particular case, meaning a vote of a majority of a quorum of the council present, and a vote of the entire council, meaning the vote of a majority of all 8 council members, and the tie-breaking authority of the mayor. This was discussed at length with the members of the commission during the course of their meetings. Basically, what we're looking at doing is amending the definitional provisions at the beginning of the charter in order to make sure and clarify that anywhere there's a reference to a vote of the council, because that language is used consistently throughout, that it would be a vote of a quorum of the council present. Beyond that, if it says a vote of the entire council, it would then imply a vote of the entirety of the 8 council members. And if there's any tie that occurs within those votes, it would then allow the mayor to be able to break that tie. Okay? Any questions about that one? Second question you'd have on there would be, shall the charter of the city of Raymore be amended to clarify the ability of the municipal judge and/or the municipal prosecutor to run for the office of mayor or a city council seat? The language that you will find if you look back in the charter was somewhat restrictive. It kind of gave an indication that the city prosecutor or city judge, if they were done serving in that capacity, would not have the ability to serve as a council member or a mayor. In this particular case, our current city prosecutor, our current city judge, municipal judge don't live within city limits and wouldn't necessarily qualify, but in the future we wanted to make sure and cover that ground for them so that there wouldn't be identifiable prohibition or questions with regard to whether or not they could serve in that capacity. Any questions about question 2? Question 3, and if you'd like, I'm happy to go back in and specifically quote to you the charter review commissions, but you'll find that I'm kind of following along, and what I've done with regard to the packet or what the commission has presented is an overview of the section that they addressed, a citation as to what the change would actually look like in the charter, and then the justification for that. So those are all available in the course of the report. The third question that would be on the ballot is kind of a comprehensive one. It covers subparagraphs A through F, and it's shall the charter of the city of Raymore, Article 3, City Council, and Article 4, Mayor, be amended in various sections. Those sections would allow for the mayor and the city council members would require that they be citizens of the United States, not subject to city liens or forfeitures, and compliant with all statutory requirements for services as an elected official. Important provision there is most of that language was already within the terms of our charter. There are statutory provisions in the state of Missouri which outline what an elected official has to also be. So the language that we are incorporating is, here's what the charter originally said were requirements to serve as a council member. And we're referencing the statutory provisions for the state of Missouri so that if the state of Missouri amends any of the statutory provisions, our charter will still be in compliance with those provisions. Okay. So if the state of Missouri amends it for legislative purposes and says, hey, an elected official must also comply with the following tax filing requirements, they would have to then comply with that. Yes. The change allows the charter to detail city-specific qualifications while providing flexibility should state law change, and I think you'll find that in the justification. Thank you, Mr. Fearborn, for pointing that out to me and not letting me continue to ramble on. B would allow for increases in the compensation of the mayor and council members by ordinance or automatically on an annual basis pursuant to the Consumer Price Index to become effective for the mayor and each council member at the commencement of his or her next term of office. So there are prohibitions which limit an individual to vote for council members to increase their pay throughout the course of their current terms. Any increase that is voted upon by ordinance would only take effect at the next council member term for each council member. There's also some discussion about how the process goes about increasing over time, and I think we've gone for a long period of time where council members haven't had their pay increased for the additional work or for the work that they do as council members. What this would do would tie the council pay to increases in the Consumer Price Index and allow for automatic increases in the pay over a period of time. Those pay increases still would not commence until the next elected or until the next term, so we would still be compliant with state statute and state constitution, but it would still allow for some increases being ratcheted up. Any questions regarding that? Okay. The next item you've got is identify the commencement of compensation for council members upon the administration of their oath of office and the termination of compensation at their resignation, removal, or the expiration of their term, prorated by a day for the month. The way that ends up working out is there was question raised by members of the commission as to when does a council member's pay start and when does it end, and how do we clarify that for individuals? I believe this is a particular focus of, at that time, Councilmember Hubach on concerns, or Commission Member Hubach at that time. This will allow there to be a specific time frame for it. Basically, the minute you take your oath of office as a council member, your pay will begin prorated from that day, and it will cease upon your resignation, death, or removal, or expiration of term. The next one you've got is the requirement that the council declare the office of the mayor to be vacant following a forfeiture of office. That brings into compliance the mayor's position, similar to what the council positions currently is. So when there's a determination and of a vacancy or a forfeiture of office, it would allow the council then to basically vote in order to determine and declare that the seat for mayor is vacant, just like it would for council members, which you'll find further down. Requiring the forfeiture of office by the mayor or council member whose members who miss more than 25% of the council's regular meetings and work sessions during any 12-month period without being excused by the council. This further defined the attendance requirements for council members. It actually made it a little bit, it allowed for taking into consideration not only your regular meetings as council members, but also taking into consideration the work sessions that we have been having on a regular basis as council members too. So it would allow for you to miss up to 25% of regular meetings and work session meetings in order to be able to maintain your position and not be removed. And the last section with regard to the mayor and council provisions is requiring the forfeiture of office if the mayor or council members who violate the terms and provisions of the Code of Conduct for elected officials as adopted by the Raymore City Code. This would allow for, obviously, removal if there is identified violation, adds additional additional enforcement provisions. Any questions about question 3? No. Moving on. Question 4, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 3, City Council, Section 3.4 be amended as regards the duties of the Mayor Pro Tem during 1, the temporary physical absence in person or disability of the mayor, or 2, in the event the mayoral seat is declared vacant, to authorize the Mayor Pro Tem to break a tie vote of the council and authorize the Mayor Pro Tem to veto ordinances and resolutions. The language that was provided for and discussed by the commission on this particular question related to when the Mayor Pro Tem is in charge and what his roles and duties are if the mayor is absent. And they discuss this in terms of when the mayor is physically absent and out of town, where he would be potentially coming back in, he or she would be coming back in and able to effectively manage or perform their duties as mayor, for example, vetoing bills or maintaining the veto right. It also allowed for the creation of more definitions under the Mayor Pro Tem, so that if there is a complete vacancy of the mayor and there is not the ability of the mayor to come back in, the full role that the Mayor Pro Tem can provide, including voting and veto breaking. I'm sorry, voting and tie breaking. Any questions about that one? Question 5, shall the charter for the City of Raymore, Article 3, City Council be amended in various sections to allow for removal of the city attorney and the city prosecuting attorney with the consent of 5 out of the 8 members of the entire council? I'm probably not the best one to be providing information on this one, but at the end of the day, what it provides is, right now, your current charter provisions allow for removal of the city attorney as well as the city prosecuting attorney by a vote of 6 of the 8 council members. This would decrease that number to 5 of the 8 council members. Moving on. Shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 3, City Council, Section 3.13, be amended to clarify the procedure for adoption of ordinances requiring that they be read by title in 2 separate open council meetings 2 times before passage unless declared an emergency? I believe this was part of the discussion as to process and procedure and raised by City Clerk, or at least discussed with the City Clerk at some length, for how the council members review and approve their ordinances when it's not going to be an emergency ordinance, and outlining some provisions within the charter for approval of emergency ordinances. Question 7, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 3, City Council, Section 3.13H, and Article 4, Mayor, Section 4.4C, be amended to change the time limit for the mayor to veto any adopted ordinance and resolution from 14 days to 10 days? You'll find part of the discussion and the justification for this consideration in the remainder of the packet, but it's basically just altering a time frame for when a veto can take place so that the council could act at the next regular council meeting. Question 8, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 4, Mayor, Section 4.1, be amended to remove the reference to military law? In going through and looking at the duties of the mayor, there was a reference in there with regard to military law. No one could identify the basis for that other than what would likely be your civil defense provisions, and it was duties with regard to what the governor can impose upon the mayor in states of emergency. We've removed the reference with regard, or recommended removal of the reference to military law. All of that would still be controlled by statute at the end of the day, as far as what the governor's powers are over the mayor and what the governor can direct the mayor to do. And we've basically said that it's the mayor would be authorized to conduct any obligations and responsibilities as provided by statute and by law. So we are attempting to remove some arcane language and perhaps some antiquated language. Question 9, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 4, Mayor, Section 4.4, be amended to authorize the mayor to break a tie vote of the council in all circumstances? This was one of the items that was greatly discussed during the course of the commission's conversations, and it speaks for itself. Basically, it would allow the mayor to step in any situation where there was a tie vote or a tie of the council in order to break that tie vote. Clarifies the language within the terms of the charter for that. Let's see, moving on. Question 10, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 5, City Manager, Section 5.1, be amended to remove the indefinite term of the city manager? And you're going to have to refresh my memory. The term that was currently provided, I believe, was a 2-year, help me out there.
The city manager's contract governs.
Right.
Rather than the charter. And the contract, the council and the commission, from our discussion, know the contract calls for a 5-year term on the contract with review each year. It seemed odd that the charter would have this vague language in it about an indefinite term that's not defined.
So, yes, that's right. The current language is the person appointed shall serve for an indefinite term, and rather than have that language in there, just allow the chapter or the contract to serve in that capacity. Shall the charter, okay, so question 11, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 9, Nominations and Elections, Section 9.3, be amended so that the term and compensation for an elected municipal official shall begin upon the reciting of the oath of office following declaration of election results by the council? This goes back to the former one that we were talking about on the beginning date and ending date for council payments. Question 12, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 9, Nominations and Elections, Section 9.4, be amended so that council members displaced following the realignment of ward boundaries should be allowed to serve for the earlier of the remainder of their terms, the next regular or special municipal election, or until their deaths or resignations. This would allow for, and we're going to be seeing one of the decennial censuses coming up, and that decennial census requires a review, thank you, requires a review and consideration for boundary lines of the wards. And if there is a ward change that alters it so that a council member would be out of the ward that they were elected for, it would allow that council member to continue to serve for the earlier of each one of those timeframes. This would, I believe, also apply to boards and commission members within the city, so it would apply for your planning and zoning and board of adjustment. Any questions about 12? Question 13, shall the Charter of the City of Raymore, Article 9, Nominations and Elections, Section 9.4, be amended so that the members of any commission or board appointed to represent individual city council wards who are displaced following the realignment of ward boundaries shall be allowed to serve for the remainder of their terms? Again, that ties in with your question number 12 above in the discussion. Question 14, shall the charter of the City of Raymore, Article 10, Initiative, Referendum, and Recall be amended in various sections to, and here we've got a breakdown of items A through C, remove the prohibition on recall of elected officials within 6 months following their induction in office. So that would allow for an elected official to be removed or recalled within the 6-month time frame from the time they first were elected into office. B, require that petitioners for any initiative, referendum, or recall provide their voter registration address and date. Benefit of that is allowing for the city clerk as well as the county clerk to verify signatures on any referendum, initiative, or petition, making sure that it complies or matches with a actual voter registration address, is not a P.O. box or something like that. And then finally, C, increase the time to certify any supplement petitions for recall, initiative, or referendum from 5 days to 10 days. Currently, obviously, the 5-day time frame, this was recommended by the city clerk, and based upon conversations I believe that she had with the county on the time frame for approving petition signatures, that would be supplemental. Finally, question 15, shall the charter of the City of Raymore, Article 14, General Provisions, Section 14.7, be amended to increase the time to certify any supplemental petition for charter amendment from 5 to 10 days. Again, this kind of goes along with the former section, allowing a alteration in the time frame, extending it out so that it gives more time to confirm the signatures, addresses, and they are verified voters. That covers all 15 of the proposed amendments. Now, I note 15 proposed questions, but that does include all 26 of the proposed recommendations from the commission. I'm happy to answer any additional questions you might have, and I'm happy to go into greater detail if you're so inclined. I might be pulling in Mr. Fearborn as well as other members of the commission if you've got questions regarding their justifications or the discussion surrounding the changes. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zur. Great job, as always. I appreciate that. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Zur or any of the commissioners from the City Council? Members of Ms. Abdelgawad.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll start by echoing Mr. Kellogg's thanks to the commission. I know that this was a lot of hard work, many, many hours of reading and discussion, and I just want to let you all know that we all know how important this work is and really appreciate the time that you guys spent both in meetings and also outside of meetings preparing for those meetings. This is probably for most people not a fun task, but we really appreciate your work on this. I have a few questions. Some of them, maybe I just need you guys to clarify based on your discussion. I tried to stay up on reading the notes that were a part of our council packet so I would have an idea about the discussions you guys were having and kind of what was going on as far as you're getting through the charter and making recommendations. But I'll just kind of start with, since we went through that ballot language, I'll just kind of run down that list with some of my questions. Starting with question 1, one of the things that you took out was where it defined the vote of 3/4 of the entire council. And I know that that's mentioned several times, even in some of the pieces that you amended, you didn't take out that 3/4 of the entire council. So the reworded part explains the difference between a vote of the council and the majority of the council, vote of the entire council, but it doesn't really define that 3/4. So I guess I'm a little concerned that that vote of 3/4 in what we've been given doesn't seem to be defined anymore. And I don't know if you want a question and then an answer, if you want me to run through all my questions.
Yeah, I think it's a great question just to go at it one at a time because it looks like that there was an awful lot of thought put into a lot of these changes that were made, and I think it would be great to discuss each one as you bring it up. Okay. So I'll let Mr. Moorhead tackle that one.
Councilmember Abdelgawad, if you look on page 6, the summary of recommended amendments, which is I think where you're getting the language of the deletions and the replacements, that is not a complete section replacement. So the 3/4 definition still remains. All we're changing is deleting two sentences and then including 2 longer sentences. So the 3/4 is still present. This is not all encompassing of the definitions.
So the 3/4 is still defined in a different place that we didn't get as part of our packet?
That is
Because
correct.
the second line that has lines through it seems to define 3/4.
Well, I mean, there is still, the only thing we touched were the 2 sentences involved. We did not touch anything further in. All our references to the number and percentage of votes is consistent. We did make sure of that. So, but this whole section A, section I, subsection A, is only a partial deletion and replacement.
So I need to
We'd
maybe
have to go-
read that, so
we'd
I'll
have to
see the
go back
rest of
to
it
the
that defines
full,
that.
Section 1.2 of the charter
Okay.
is actually about 11 paragraphs.
Okay, so I
So
need to do a little more research.
That would be a great starting point, and then come back and see how we wove that in.
Okay.
Mr. Zur.
If I might also, as further information on that, I think if you look through the remainder of the charter, you'll find references. Each one of the times that there is a requirement for a 3/4 vote, it is very clearly outlined in that particular portion for a 3/4 vote of the entire council. So it's our hope that the language that you've got will be able to be read in conjunction with further provisions within the charter that make specific reference to 3/4 of the vote of the entire council.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else want to add anything to that? If not, go ahead.
All right, very good. The next one, let's see. On question 3, letter E, and this may seem nitpicky, but if we're going to look at 25% of regular meetings and work sessions during 12 months, I was just thinking, does that include special meetings? Does that include the 5th work session? If we do a work session on a 5th Monday, does that include our Saturday budget meetings? Or, I mean, is that going to include all the meetings of the council, or is it just work sessions and regular meetings? I didn't know if we felt like there was a need to further define that as well.
Go ahead.
The way we discussed it was, we looked at when the mayor or the council by its own directive under the charter can declare a meeting. Those are considered actual effective meetings, regardless if it's regular, special, regardless if we're just meeting for executive session, a budget review on Saturday. If it is called by the mayor or the council, it counts as a meeting, and then you would add the totality of those. We kind of, from a justification standpoint, believed that when the formality of the meeting was declared, that your role or a role of a council member has a significance, and therefore that should factor in.
I would ask Mr. Zur, could you tell us what the existing requirements are at this point? I know you've been looking through the...
Only regular meetings
Yeah,
are
it's
required
only
at this
Just only
point.
regular meetings?
So only a reference to regular meetings at this particular time.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's great that we should be required to be at any meeting of the council. I was just concerned about that language. Should it say any meeting of the council, not just regular and work session meetings? Because like the budget meeting, I don't know if it's kind of a gray area. You know, we have some meetings that are kind of a gray area.
Sure. Go ahead, sir.
Just to kind of, one of the things that when we talked about that, and I'll ask, obviously, anything I say, I'd ask for any other charter member to step in. We did recognize that there have been instances where we get together, for example, ribbon cuttings, other things that are official duties, but those are not defined as a declared meeting under our charter, where it requires the requisite number of council members to request it or that the mayor requests it. So we did kind of discuss where there would be kind of a tipping point on that, to recognize that there could be social or quasi-social or non-official gatherings that would not be recognized.
So would the definition be any posted meeting? Like when we interview, would that be one of the 25%? I'm concerned that there's a gray area there, and if it came down to dismissing a council member for that, I think it's important that it be defined very clearly.
Good point.
And I think, yeah, I was going to say that would be, because, respectfully, the staff put together the ultimate ballot language. We did not. And so, based on the way we would chew through things, I would have no doubt that we would probably spend half hour just talking about that. So that would be good for later discussion.
Okay, and I think, okay, go ahead, Kevin. No, I was just going to say that, I think for purposes of reconvening the group, because we haven't dismissed you as an organization, that would be probably part of a laundry list of things that we might end up coming up with here in the next couple of work sessions that you guys could reconvene and reconsider for potential amendment to that. I assume that that's the case. and what
Kind of
we're
like the
talking about.
governor's veto, or special sessions, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Call a special.
Special session. Yeah. And Mr. Kellogg, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But to dovetail off that brings up a question. Would this is a question for everybody, but if the commission has considered this, please chime in. Would a quorum requirement be in place at that point then under the new change that, the proposed change that we're requiring council members, all council members to be at these meetings, or it can be counted against them for removal? Now, with that said, does the quorum requirement that we have to conduct our regular meeting become an issue for our work session meeting? Just food for thought and question there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of two separate issues there with regard to the quorum. I think Sonia brings up a good point that any posted meeting might actually benefit us by saying that, because it kind of lumps them all together anyway, because all of our work sessions, council meetings, special sessions, interviews like we've done for judge or prosecutor, those are all open meetings that are posted ahead of time. Might it be part of that process? And then you're getting into 50 or 60 meetings, and to miss 10 or 12 of those seems pretty ridiculous to think about, that somebody would actually miss that many meetings in a year when hardly any of us miss maybe even one through that process. So it'd have to be somebody deliberatively doing that. But I do think that's a good question that you pose for purposes, and I'm getting nudged over here for additional input, but go ahead.
And would point out the charter also specifically defines work sessions, and it specifically defines regular meetings, which gave staff some comfort level in the proposed ballot language, because we are limiting it to the work sessions that are called and to the regular meetings. Not, for instance, a posted meeting was the council meeting at Centerview on Friday. So that meeting would not count into the total number. A special meeting called by the mayor on a different night would not count into that same number unless it was to replace, which is announced in the special meeting announcement, if it was replacing a regular meeting night. This is a special meeting to actually replace that. That would count into the number. One of the interesting anomalies that I noted is actually the change in the ballot language from a mathematical standpoint means that members can actually miss more meetings, because the two are combined, so you could actually miss more regular meetings if you didn't miss any work sessions.
Do the commissioners have any input on that? Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate you bringing up the point that it would be indeed ridiculous for somebody to miss 13 out of 52 weeks of meetings. We meet approximately once a week, and then we have extra meetings. But one of the things we discussed was that we felt it was important that people be at the work sessions, because some of the most important work that we do, and certainly the transparency of the work that we do, is done in work sessions for the public, and so we kind of need to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, Son, you got something else?
All right, this is just kind of a comment. I don't know that we necessarily need to discuss it, or maybe we can. On question 4, I feel like after reading the packet and seeing the changes, that just the ballot language on question 4 seemed really vague. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what's happening from that language, in my opinion. I don't know if anybody has discussion on that.
Well, I was I had a similar question about that because I never thought the mayor pro tem lost his or her opportunity to vote because they are the pro tem, and even seated as the acting mayor does not lose their vote during the process. So you're not actually acting in a mayoral capacity because the mayor doesn't have an opportunity to vote except in what the new law is going to say, a 4-4 tie, a true 4-4. So if you only had 6 members present and it tied 3-3, the mayor still can't vote because it has to be in the entire council. And that's the delineation they're trying to make, whether it's in this one or the next item on the agenda. I had questions about that myself, about whether or not, what was the purpose of question 4? Because the mayor pro tem, as a council member, appointee, never loses their right to vote. You got something on that?
Yes. Specifically, if you look on page 9, in the middle text, the main component of this question is actually the last section, which is bolded. In discussing this, we had considered both a previous historical example. We have actually had a pretty significant trend of mayors who did not finish their term. And so what we were identifying was a potential loophole where you could actually have a scenario where a mayor it's undefined whether or not they've actually vacated, and yet the mayor pro tem has to step in and take care of duties. But then what you basically get is you get a mayorless town because the mayor pro tem stays with the role as a councilman. And so, for example, if the mayor was gone for an extended period of time, the citizens have no ability to have someone exercise a veto, place appointments, and do other tasks that are specific to the mayor. And so we were concerned about that. And again, the appointments, the mayor pro tem right now, it's not defined in here. It doesn't say they can't, but by practice and recent example, we've really not wanted the mayor pro tem to appoint boards and commissions in lieu of the mayor. But if we have a mayor that's out and we're not sure whether it's temporary or permanent, the city business does not get completely done. So this was to offer a sentence, to offer a definition. Once it's determined that the mayor has hit a point where the definition of being vacant has been determined, then the mayor pro tem, the city still gets a mayor. And in essence, it sacrifices the councilman to ensure that the city at least has a mayor instead of being mayorless.
Go ahead, Tim.
I think the wording on here is what's confusing, because if I recall, we spent a lot of time on this issue right here. And at the end, what we're saying is the mayoral seat is declared vacant. We're going to authorize the mayor pro tem a vote to break the tie. We're also giving him the right to veto in the same deck of cards. So it can't be both there. He can't vote no against something, and if it goes through, turn around and veto it. So I think the wording on this is the real issue.
And that's kind of what I was saying. I felt like question 4, I get where you're going with the changes, and I think it's something that needs to happen. I just felt like the wording in question 4, as far as ballot language, was pretty vague. It doesn't really explain to people what we're trying to do.
Food for thought as well. Go ahead. You got something else?
Next, question on number 9, and this may be something that's kind of like my first question, written further down in the charter that just isn't a part of the information that we got. But shall the charter of the city of Raymore be amended to authorize the mayor to break a tie vote of the council in all circumstances? And so I thought, well, if it's a vote requiring, one of the votes that requires 6 council members, and it's a 4-4, does the mayor get to break that tie?
I don't think so.
So that's not what,
I think
in
that
all
was a change
circumstances,
we
that's
were-
not what this says.
Yeah.
Well, but mathematically, if it requires 6 and there's a tie, you can't have a tie and meet the 6, so that the tiebreaker is irrelevant.
But I don't think that was your question. I think you were talking about 6 members present, or were you actually talking about?
Well, if you read question 9, break a tie vote of the council in all circumstances. And I know that that's just part of a section, but again, I'm concerned that when people read this in the ballot language and they're gonna be like, oh, well, break a tie vote in all circumstances. To me, that means even if it's something that requires 6 of the council and it's a 4-4 tie, then the mayor gets to break the tie.
Well, and we had significant discussion on this, both really in the beginning when we were going through the definitional structure, and then we hit it as it applied in various sections. The key here is we're combating a greater ambiguity, because right now our current existing definitional section has been so ambiguous that it led to litigation and a court ruling. And so the problem here is, what is the significance of breaking a tie? You can break a tie and lose. For example, if it requires a majority, that's why going back to the initial definitions is so important, because if you have a requirement that you must have 5 of 8, but let's say only 6 council members show up that night, and there's a tie 3-3, well, the mayor can break the tie, but even if his vote is added, it doesn't hit 5. So therefore, he can break the tie for the sake of because the purpose of declaring a tie is to have a resolution of a vote instead of leaving it stalemated. But it doesn't mean that something passes or fails. And so in that particular instance, there could be, and we did play out those unique scenarios. You could have an instance where the mayor breaks the tie, but the vote still fails. And so the problem that we're facing here is, and I understand what you're saying, that it may open up, be too broad of a statement to say breaks it in all cases, but when reincorporated with the definitions in the beginning, you still have the applicability of what is of the entire council or just majority of the council.
But in the situation where you're talking about the 3-3 tie and a 4th vote doesn't mean anything,
That's correct.
because you're not going to have the entirety of the council when required.
In those instances. But we do have an instance of majority of the council where you could, for example, we recently were discussing when Councilmember Stevens stepped off the board, we had 7 members on the council. Technically, if there was an abstention or an absence, you could have a 3-3, but the majority of the council dropped from 5-4. So there's a lot of, and Judge Campbell in his court decision actually spent several paragraphs talking about all the different ways that ties can apply and be applicable.
Mr. Zerr, did you have anything to add to that?
I would simply refer back to page 14. You'll note in the, about halfway down, what it really is doing is making specific reference to removing the provisions so that the mayor would be able to vote if there was any tie involving the city attorney, the city prosecuting attorney, and the city manager, which are specifically outlined as restrictions currently under the terms of the charter.
And to Councilmember Moorhead's point, with the city manager not changing, it is still the fact that it takes 3/4 of the council, so it would be a moot point to have city manager in here. And in the beginning, when this was proposed, Had it remained 3/4 for the city prosecutor, the city attorney, and the city manager, it would have applied to all of them. It would have been redundant language. However, now what it will do is it does give the mayor the ability to break the tie in the case of the city attorney and city prosecutor if the vote of the people goes to 5 votes for those 2 individuals. It will allow to break that tie and break that stalemate. But for 3/4, it's still a moot point.
Okay, I want to ask a question of clarification on the current charter. Something in my memory tells me or reminds me that the mayor breaks a tie on an ordinance, not a resolution. Am I correct or am I incorrect with that right there?
Mr. Moore?
I'm sorry, Mr. Zerr, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't call.
I would point out, and I'll ask any charter members to step in on this, when we were looking at this, the charter does not spend a great deal of time delineating and merely just mentions voting. So we do vote on resolutions as well as ordinances. Now, there may be some instances where Mr. Zerr can kind of branch the tree a little further, but the initial use of terminology in the charter does not delineate between the two. So it would be a vote. If there's any tie of any vote, that would apply both ordinance as well as resolution.
Okay,
I would agree.
you'd agree? Another question that comes up with this subject, that there is no requirement, I'm wondering if the Charter Committee had considered this. There is no requirement on the mayor to actually break a tie if the mayor chooses not to. Where are we at with that? Is there any more thought behind that, or am I the only one that's worrying about this? Because if a mayor chooses not to break a tie, in my opinion, he somewhat makes a choice by allowing a subject to die to begin with, without having to step up to the plate and actually take a side. Well, yeah, and I agree, but, and I don't want to sound like this, but, I have seen politicians, not necessarily here in Raymore, but I have seen situations where politicians, they are able to worm out of a subject by not saying one way or another, and they absolve themselves from either blame or glory in that fashion. Yes. And that's where I'm going with it, is what am I worried about ghost in the closet, or was this actually?
Mr. Kellogg, actually, I think all of us are kind of stirring a little bit because we spent significant time, you're kind of touching a nerve here for us, and we laugh because of the fact that this, while we did not specifically draw reference to the mayor abstaining, we did go into a significant discussion about for or against votes and abstentions, when to abstain. By operation of law, if the mayor either votes against the motion or abstains from the vote, it, by operation of law, would fail. And so the mayor, in essence, like you said, an inaction is in fact an action for the sake of a vote and recognition of under Robert's rules, how to declare a motion. So in that particular instance, we had significant discussion about that, and we were worried about that. I mean, there was still a leaning to recognize the value of abstention, but it was a very cautious leaning that we really dissuaded the use, and we tried to think of ways to kind of really draw in and make it very narrow to use that. While still allowing the very limited instances you could. In this particular instance, though, up until then, the mayor's not really had a full stroke of the brush as far as the ability to break a tie. This new language would offer a whole new series of opportunity for the mayor, and unfortunately, we had to kind of recognize that it's an infinite argument that we could accidentally open this up and come up with 500 scenarios where the mayor could manipulate or use that. But then the problem became, we still overridingly have to respect the council, because each council member has the ability to potentially use abstention. And we would hope, and I think the phrase used was, we would hope that everyone stepping on the dais acts in good faith, and that the mayor kind of is entrusted. I think the phrase trust but verify was even thrown out a few times. So we recognize there is a potential loophole here where it could be exploited. We believe, though, that that would be minimally used or may not ever, because here's the key. The question actually came up, how many times in the last 3 years has a mayor actually broken a tie? And we're still in single digits. So even, and the only instances that we've really added back in, many of those happen so rarely. For example, removal of particular staff or personnel, that we're not dramatically increasing many opportunities here. But you touched a nerve that was a very important question that we had. And I've talked a great deal. If other council members wish to relive the trauma, please share.
I guess I'll offer an apology. I didn't mean to strike a nerve, but by golly, if I've got a question, I need to ask it, you know. So I appreciate, again, I really do appreciate all of you guys' consideration, discussions, and clarification. So again, thank you so much.
Sure. Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, we're going to go through the rest of these, but at the end, if there are things that we want to talk about and discuss further as we go into our next couple work sessions, the availability of watching all of these meetings and all the discussion, you can go to the website and look at the agenda, match it up with the YouTube video, and watch the video where we discuss that. It might be 2 or 3 videos, though, but as far as that particular issue. But all the discussions are posted on YouTube, and they are all available if you want to hear all the details.
I'm not sure you really want to know how the sausage was made, but go ahead, Sonia.
All right. I guess just to summarize that maybe a little bit, I wonder if on question 9 we need to make the wording a little more clear. If we were able to have that much discussion over that, I feel like we need more information on question 9 as far as ballot language. And those are all the questions I have, but I do want to just throw out there, just because I feel like I have to say it, I am adamantly against the annual raises for council members and the mayor. And I know you guys discussed that quite a bit from reading your notes, but I think that's wrong to be written in the charter.
Mr. Burke?
Thank you. On that issue, there are instances that it could be an automatic decrease if the economy was to go down.
I don't think it would, but okay.
I mean, that is with.
Because it only mentions increases. But anyway, I think that, you know, that was discussed as well. You know, the existing ability for the board to authorize any kind of pay increase or to somehow come up with some kind of compensation adjustment that seemed fair. I know they discussed that quite a bit, and I appreciate that as well. And I appreciate your comment, too. Thank you. Do any of the other council members have questions? Mr. Kellogg?
I don't want to stop the other council members from jumping in here. I'm going to jump to question 14 if somebody has something before that. Okay, question 14. And I'm going to have to up my prescription on my reading glasses here. Section A, 14A. Remove the prohibition of recall of elected officials within 6 months following the induction into office. Going back to page 18 is where that's addressed, is in the top paragraph, it leaves during the last 6 months of officials' terms. I'm kind of curious why we are only proposing the 1 6 months and not the other, because currently, a council member cannot be subject to recall the first 6 months that they are in office or the last 6 months before they leave office. That's my question.
Mr. Moorhead.
Another one, you're bringing up very good questions because this was a very spirited discussion. What helped precipitate this was taking into consideration that a council member has a term of 24 months. And when this was written in, this is fairly boilerplate language to other charters. So there's not a real deep historical or institutional reason to have this. One of the concerns is you actually you almost give indemnity for 1/2 of a council member's term, especially when we've included considering a code of ethical conduct for the council. And so the citizens should have the right to have their representative of their choice. Now, the language of the first 6 months and last months, we did debate that extensively about to either take it to 3 months, include one, not the other, reverse them. The primary argument, and we had a former council member show up and make a very good point that I had to concede on, which was in the last 6 months, if you consider that timing falls right about the November election, before a municipal election. And then within 30 days of that, about 45 days of that, you're having declarations of candidacy for municipal office. If there was an issue that arose where where the citizens wanted to file a recall, we're already in essence in an election cycle to replace them. So to try to take on the cost to the citizens to remove them, which would in essence only be about a 30-day removal, that's not really cost effective. In addition, we're including language in here that could potentially allow the council themselves, if the conduct was bad enough, to remove independently in another area. The reason for the initial 6 months, why that was, and there was some significant debate on this, there can be instances where a candidate is misleading or something happens that was not disclosed prior to the vote, something that would be egregious enough where the citizens shouldn't have to wait for 6 months to get recourse to get a new representative. And there was no solid rationale to explain. And actually, our boards of elections have a window within that 6 months that statutorily you can have an election. And so there is an opportunity to do that. And it was just the discussion that the people should have who they want to represent them as much as they want. And if it's their desire to replace them, if they can rise, because remember, they have to get 30% of the registered voters, keeping in mind that we've, exceeded 12% at a maximum in the last 5 years. So it's very difficult. It would be an extreme measure. So this is a very unused section of the charter, but because it could, we're looking at every loophole. This is a dangerous loophole for the voters.
Was there any consideration to the removal of the entire sentence?
That was discussed as well. We batted around a whole series of options. We literally had to go to diagrams on the board.
Little stick people.
And I will say, even though this was approved to go into this, I don't believe our vote was unanimous to get there. So there was still some contention on this issue. This was widely debated.
Okay. Mr. Kellogg, do you have anything else at this time?
No, sir, but thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you. Any other council members have anything at this time?
Want to say something? I think Tim wants to say
Mr. Stidham?
Councilmember Abdel-Gawad just asked what the opposition or the other option would be. The other option was to leave it 6 and 6 the way that it is on this one. My reasoning for that was that I believe if in the day of social media that we live in and awareness, when a candidate becomes a candidate, anything they've ever done or ever will do is made public. I find it hard to believe that 6 months, in the first 6 months after an election, that we're going to find something egregious enough that we are going to want to have a recall for that position. I think that if the voters elect someone, they need to be allowed to serve. After 6 months, if they don't fit the requirements, or if something does come up that they have had something in their past, or they display a quality that is not what we want them to display as a representative of a ward or out of a community, at that time there are other procedures to take them out of office. By allowing the recall within the first 6 months, you're taking the vote away from the people that elected them. People come to the polls, and in the past, we've had issues with getting people to the polls, and you come out, and finally we get someone elected, and for 30% of the registered voters who might have wanted somebody else, they get a petition up for recall. You're taking the vote, right? I mean, if you want to stop people from going to the polls, take their vote away from them and reverse what they went and voted on. I think there's got to be a learning curve. I just don't think it's good business.
Thank you, sir. Well, I think we've come to a point where there's an awful lot to consider here. We'll have another work session in 2 or 3 weeks. Is it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? 2 weeks. Is it July 3rd, right?
July 3rd, 2
Yeah.
weeks, sir.
So we'll be meeting again to discuss these items that we've talked about tonight, or any others that may come up. Mr. Holman's not with us tonight from the council, so I'm sure he's a very thorough thinker as well, deep thinker, and I'm sure he'll have something to express at that time as well. Again, I want to thank the commission for all the hard work that you all have done. Stephanie, 3 times in the last 20 years, that's a lot of thought to give to one document, and we appreciate you giving it that and your time. Mr. Castleman, thank you for your return, and to the members that stepped forward and served this time, thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate it, and so we'll go ahead and move on to the next item. And again, thank you, and hopefully you can come back for the next work session. If not, or you watch it on YouTube and come back to the third one and say, hey, I oppose that. Or I agree with that. But anyway, so we'll move on to the next item, was the APWA accreditation site visit.
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Krass to make the report. And now, Mr. Krass.
Yes, sir. There's dead air like on the radio, so. Over the past 2 years, the City Public Works Department has been working to achieve accreditation from the American Public Works Association. Purpose of the accreditation program is to provide a means of formally verifying and recognizing public works agencies for compliance with recommended practices that are set by the American Public Works Association. Thank you. Some of the things it does is create an impetus for organizational self-improvement and a general raising of standards. So as we went through this, what they have published is a Public Works Management Practices Manual. It's a manual of best practices. It's caused us to evaluate our practices, in some cases adopt operating procedures that we had not put in place. Those that were in place, it generated the need for us to document those and then look at improvement. So what that leads to is improving our performance and our provision of services, increases professionalism. Things that I found going through this with my staff is instilling pride. I mean, when we sit down and look at what we've done, what we have in place, it really can't speak highly enough of my staff. It's also formal recognition for our voters, our constituents, that we are good stewards of the resources that we're given. It recognizes us as a well-run agency. It provides for consistent and comprehensive practices. And so that's what accreditation is. Where we are at in the process right now, the accreditation is a three-phase process. First is a self-assessment. And a self-assessment is going through the practices, looking at where we are and where we need to be. And then the second phase is documenting or implementing the practices to fill in the gaps or document those that we've been doing. We have reached what is the third phase, and that is the evaluation by a team of accreditation evaluators. Want to point out just a couple of things is that the accreditation practices manual consists of 40 chapters. Of those, we are responsible for 609 practices. Some cities in our size are responsible for as little as 150. So it recognizes that our staff, and it's citywide. It starts at administration. It starts with strategic planning, works through the entire administration process, human resources, finance, risk management, and then gets down into the operations of the department. So it really is an examination of our citywide practices and how they apply to public works. Main person that I want to recognize that has carried the water for this effort is Melissa Paith. She's my administrative assistant. More than once, half jokingly, you will hear me say that she allows me to think that I run the organization. So she is invaluable in this process. Steve Welch also, who manages the operations and maintenance division. Again, getting back to where we are in the process, we have invited the evaluators, and they will be coming on their committee consisting of 3 of my peers that are coming from accredited agencies, and then the accreditation director for the APWA will be visiting on June 26th, 27th, and 28th. They will be meeting with department heads and various others all day on the afternoon of June 26th, all day on June 27th, and we will be receiving a debriefing Wednesday morning before they depart. We have sat through kind of a peer review with one of the evaluators who is from the city of Shawnee, and she was gracious enough to come over and kind of flip through some things with us and point out some things to hopefully make the process go smoother. One of the events that we are having, and Mr. Fearborn has passed out, is on Tuesday evening. We are getting together and having a dinner with the evaluators, and I'd like to extend an invitation to all the council and their guests. It's a very informal process right now. It will be at Centerview. We're planning to put the Royals game on and have barbecue catered in, just kind of a get-together decompression session. So would really like to invite council and their guests to attend with that. It's been a long process. I think it's been a interesting process, and a process that is going to continue to move forward, because one of the things that come out of this is continuous improvement. There's a reaccreditation process every 4 years where we reevaluate our practices and bring them up to, if there's changes that need to be made, or just to look at them and see how they've been put into practice. So with that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions council may have.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody have any questions? Sonia?
I do. I'm full of questions tonight. I'm just curious, Mike, you mentioned that some cities only have maybe 150 practices and we have 609. Can you help me understand why there's such a big difference?
Well, it depends on what their responsibilities are. Some we have sewer and water, which adds quite a bit. Other communities may only have streets that they're responsible for, and other, like on the Kansas side, Johnson County Wastewater handles sewer, Water One handles the potable water, so they don't have that although they may be cities of similar size or larger, they don't have that component. But they may have where we have, where we don't have fleet services, they may have fleet services. So it's how it all fits the organization.
Yeah, from a law enforcement perspective, the Commission for the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies is similar to what the process is that they're going through. Depending on the size of your organization and amount of things that you are participating in within your community, the responsibilities the police department has, there's a set of standards that meet that, and they'll grow from, like Mike was saying, 100 and something all the way up to like 800 standards that the police department has to meet. It just depends on the range of services that the organization has to provide to their community, and I'm sure that's pretty much the same, isn't it, Mike? Yeah.
Yes, it is, sir.
Can I say
Sure,
one more
go ahead.
thing? I've been involved in accreditation, working in early childhood. That's huge, for early childhood centers, and I know it's quite a task, quite a bear, lots of boxes to check, and reflection and evaluation and making things better. And so congrats to your team for getting this far on this, and 609 practices, that's a lot. So thanks for all your work on
That
this
is a
and your
lot.
team as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any other questions? Mr. Kellogg?
It's not so much a question, but it might be, but my understanding that staff subjected themselves to these scrutinized standards, and I have to applaud them and recognize that they welcome this, and they're striving to meet it. So I think they're doing a fantastic job. Congratulations, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mike. Our next item and final, hopefully, is the is the update to the City Council on the solid waste request for proposal. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is primarily just to give you a brief update on where we are in the process and the calendar moving forward. As the council knows, the city issued a joint request for proposal with the City of Belton for solid waste recycling and yard waste pickup. The proposal as it was structured was for a 3-year period, so that there would be a time frame for review that went with other professional services. The City of Belton is going through this for the first time. They are where we were at in that agonizingly fun period that we had when we first took on solid waste in the 2008-2009 timeframe. To that end, for those of you who are unaware of who this individual is sitting in the back corner, we have been working very, very closely with Miss Alexa Barton, who is the City of Belton's city manager. So we're in double august company tonight with the mayor and Miss Barton, and we thank her for being here tonight. The city received 6 proposals. All but one were qualified and considered responsive. We had to call in 3 of the companies to get clarification on elements of their proposal. We will be bringing a recommended vendor to the council next Monday night, a week from tonight. The second reading of that, should the council approve on first reading, would be July 10th. This would be for services going into effect on January 1. The reason, and one of the reasons I wanted to come to you all tonight to remind you is, it is whenever there is a pricing change or a change to the elements of a contract, especially this contract, there is a long lead time to educate our folks up. We start, when there is a change to the pricing in the contract, we start that informational campaign, even if it's going down, which it has for, that's the only direction that our pricing has gone since we first took this on. We begin that process in late August of informing our citizenry of what's going to happen. In this case, all of the vendors who turned in proposals necessarily had changes that were going to be associated with it. Specifically, the overarching changes that we saw from every single one of them, and we knew this was going to be coming, that are the pickup days are going to increase. It is extremely difficult for any of the vendors to have a one-day put out and one-day pickup. So all of them proposed multiple days to do that. We will be bringing the details, obviously, next week when we do that on how we foresee most of these going. All of the vendors have proposed very excellent cart programs, changes to both the size of the carts, recommended carts that would be out there, some pretty unique things out there relative to what can and cannot be done relative to tracking elements. We are going to be proposing within the contract an increase to the number of yard waste pickups because leaves do not fall in this city until really late in the fall, especially down in Silver Lake, where sometimes they don't fall at all, it seems like. We're going to be proposing an extended period for yard waste pickup within the elements of the contract. The time frame moving forward would be award in July, and then working with immediately, Mr. Icky will begin working on the informational campaign that will be associated with this particular program, almost a blitz campaign. Any changes that are going to go into place relative to the CART program would have to be seriously identified with our folks as far as what that was going to mean, what it was going to mean for carts being picked up or taken away, and how all of that was going to be implemented, because that's the boots on the ground for our folks. All of the vendors proposed a standardized cart, but the ability, just like what we have in place now, for the citizens to make their own choice. If they did not want the carts to be in place, if they wanted a smaller cart, we saw that a lot, where our proposed cart, then folks came back and asked that not be the one that's going to be in place. All of the vendors proposed for the first year an increase in pricing. None of the with one exception, none of the vendors give a little something away here, since one of them's sitting right behind me. All of them were below our targeted amount, with the exception of one who we considered that to be a bit of a throwaway bid. Sometimes you'll get one of those. If they get it, they get it. If they don't, no harm, no foul. But we did want to update you because it's going to be coming at you next week, and it's really early before the contract period is up on December 31st. But there are reasons behind that so that we can keep our citizens on the informational edge that we want them to be whenever a contract like this is changing.
Jim, for clarification, we're still in an evaluative stage, is that correct? Where there are questions from citizens can come to you and be answered, but we're still kind of evaluating. We've not chosen the vendor yet. We're still evaluating. Is that correct, or have we?
No, we're going to be bringing to you next week
Okay.
the proposed contract and ordinance.
All right, but we're okay.
There are still questions to be answered.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Mr. Kellogg?
That may have just stunted this question. It's not very often that it happens, and we get our packets on Thursday. With this being as the topic that it is and as big as it is, would it be possible for us to get the packet earlier than Thursday? And Jim just said that more questions need to be asked, and that would, I guess, would those questions affect what we're going to be seeing next Monday night?
I doubt it real seriously, sir. The bottom line on this is, while there are some overarching changes, the keen elements of what our folks are used to don't change. Carts are provided, but you don't have to use the cart. You can still do pickup just the way it is. The elements of what yard waste are going to be don't change. The elements of the recycling, cart is provided, but it doesn't have to be inside the cart. It can be outside the cart. So for the day-to-day elements that our citizens are going to see, none of that changes. The administrative aspect that we have internally isn't going to change. The primary changes are the ones that I brought to you. It would be virtually impossible to get this to you early.
Okay, that explains it. I mean, if that's the case, but if at all possible, if we could get this any earlier, I would appreciate it, but if we can't, I can accept that too, so, but if I don't ask, I can't get it, so that's where I'm at.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And as always, we come to the next item, which is other. Is there anything else that the council wishes to discuss tonight? Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to inform you and the council that I have to apologize. I will not be able to be here on July 10th. We took my family, it took a year and a half for us to get dates at Arlington for my wife's grandfather and his wife were both retired Air Force. And so we got lucky and finally got a date, so we'll be in Washington, D.C.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Fearborn?
Thank you. Just wanted to give the council a very early heads up that once again, the MML conference in September, which I know a number of you do like to attend at this point, does fall on a regular meeting night, I believe. So just to be giving everybody a heads up on the possibility of a special meeting, I suppose.
True. Where is it being held this year?
I think it is, yeah, I think it is
it's in
Tantera this year.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone have anything else? If not, we're through for the evening. Thank you.